Welcome to Sabbatical Stories. I'm your host Bex Thomas, and today I'm coming to you from my lovely hometown of Lyme Regis, a special place that if you get the chance I really encourage you to visit. I set up this podcast to inspire courage and normalise taking a break from your career, and I'd love it if you could help too by subscribing, liking and rating the show. It really would mean a lot. Today I've got the privilege to be joined by Steve Duke, an ex-McKinsey consultant with Irish roots living in Sydney, whose sabbatical story has helped him redefine what his identity looks like and find fun again. In this episode, we'll explore how Steve had a shock redundancy and saw it as a sign to take his sabbatical, how he and his Jeep took to the Aussie road with next to no plan other than rediscovering fun and trying to find out what he really wanted to do on his return. We discuss how his sabbatical provided him with a space away from day-to-day influences which had to this point shaped his desires, how prototyping life and using micro experiences helped him learn what he really did want to do next, how coming home is the hardest part, and how there is no such thing as shutting the box on a sabbatical, and way, way more. Deep down, you've tried, dig deep, search wide, enjoy your climb, it's all for you. Hi Steve, and welcome to Sabbatical Stories. Thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate you. To give listeners a little bit of a background, I reached out to Steve and asked him to come and share his story, as I know it's a grand one, which involves redundancy, a Jeep, and maybe some kangaroos. So, Steve, as it's exactly that, your story, who better to introduce it than you? So could you give us a little bit of an introduction to Steve Duke and your sabbatical story?
100%. I certainly can. I'm Steve Duke, and what I do now is, which is, a year and a half since I've taken my sabbatical, is I run a company called the Hemingway Group. And what we do is we help mental health startups to grow. So I'm kind of foreshadowing some of the outcomes from my sabbatical. What prompted my sabbatical was about 18 months ago. So kind of coming towards the end of 2022, I'd actually been thinking about taking some time off, like from my job, for a couple of different reasons that I could get into. And then I was actually made redundant. So that decision was made very, very easy for me, which was like a massive shock. That was something that like I never, ever would have thought like possible for me, to be honest with you. And I decided, right, this is a great time for me to actually take this time off. I'd never taken time off before. I came out of university, I went straight into a job at McKinsey. From McKinsey, my next job, I ended my work at McKinsey on a Friday and I joined the other one on a Monday. Like I had no gap in between the two of them. And then I did the same again for like the next job after that, the other startup I was working in. So I'd never taken time off, and I'd never actually taken the time and headspace to decide what I wanted to do. I was lucky enough that opportunities kind of came to me. And so I was just able to say yes or no to them. But that's very different to me sitting down and saying, this is what I want to do because I know that this will make me happy, make me fulfilled, whatever else, and then going and finding it. And so I wanted to take that time off to do that. But then also I wanted to take the time off to just have a bit of fun too, because I'd moved to Australia and I just worked all the time. I'd taken no time to actually travel. Like I'd been here years and I'd seen so little of it, and I'd never taken time off. I was very, very focused on my career and progressing, all that sort of stuff. And so that was kind of the impetus for it. Those kind of two reasons.
And so just going back, you mentioned that you were thinking about taking time off, but then obviously redundancy maybe fast forwarded that decision. What if redundancy hadn't have happened? What were the sort of triggers that were making you think about taking the time off?
It was really just about not being like fully satisfied in my job. This had happened like for years and years and years. I'd always like wondered about, what is it that I'd really want to do? I liked what I did, but it never felt perfect. And I think a lot of people can probably empathize with that. You're like, oh yeah, like it's not bad, right? Like I can get by, like it's absolutely fine, but it's not really fulfilling me, and it's not something that I could see myself like doing for ages. So that was one of the things. And it's really hard to figure it out when you're in a job. So I used to try and figure it out while I was working or in the evenings or when I would go on holidays. But it's actually really tough, not just because you don't have the time, but you actually don't really have the headspace for it. That's what I found. Like you're kind of drained, and to go through what you want to find out to do with your career, it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of work. And so trying to do it while you're working is possible, but it's tricky. And so I think that
Mm.
was kind of what was driving me to, to take a bit of space. And then that coupled with the fact that I'd just never taken time off, right? I'd always been like super focused on my career, super productive. Thankfully, I'd had good opportunities come to me and I didn't want to let them pass by, so that was my priority, right? And then as I started to get a little bit older, I started to realize, oh, this is the stuff out there that, you know, I might like to do. And so that was kind of what was bringing me to that point. I wanted to take some time off.
And so redundancy happened. How did you then make the decision that yes, you were going to take a period of time off? And did you think about how long that would be, or talk us through kind of what was going through your head when that happened,
Mm.
and then how that sort of break materialized?
So I think I was close enough to actually taking the break myself that once the redundancy happened, it was like a no-brainer. I don't think I even thought about, trying to get back into work or anything else. So straight away I was like, okay, this is 100%. It's almost a sign, right? This is what I'm going to do. I didn't have a plan for how long I would take off. I had a plan for what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this big trip in Australia. And the reason that I know that I was already close to making this decision was that I already bought the car that I was going to do this trip in, right? So that's a pretty good sign that I was pretty close to making that situation. So I bought a car. I wanted to kit it out so that I could live in it. And then I was going to drive around Australia. That was my plan. I was going to take the drive all the way around Australia. I reckoned it would take somewhere between 6 and 12 months, but I wasn't particularly sure. And I had no plan. I had no plan for how long it was going to take or what I was going to do when I got back or any of that. It was really, and this sounds very unlike me because I'm usually a bit of a planner. So I really just wanted to take that time out and go and do something cool.
And so, talk us through your planning of you didn't quite know, how long the trip would be or whatever, but there must have been some kind of planning of kitting the car out and getting a date to leave. What did that look like?
Yeah, so I spent so long kitting the car out, a bunch of money too, to be honest with you. But it was a blast. I loved it, right? So I'd kind of been working on it anyway, and then I think I was made redundant in like November. So I was like, okay, I'll stay around till Christmas, and then kind of in the new year, like maybe second week of January or something, I'll head off. So that was kind of the deadline that I'd set myself. And so yeah, I just spent honestly like 12 hours a day every day like kitting this car out, like ripping it apart, putting it back together again, and learning how to do stuff that honestly I had no idea how to do. I actually am a mechanical engineer technically, like that's what I did in university, but you would not know it like looking at what I was doing to this car. And so then my brother was actually moving over to Australia around the same time. So I was like, hey, you're going to just be here. Why don't you join me for like the start of this trip, right? So he got here at the start of January, and then second week of January, like we headed off. And honestly, my plan was like, I just needed to pick a direction to head, right? Do you go clockwise or counterclockwise? And because of the time of year, it made sense to go clockwise. So I just got in the car in Sydney one day and just started driving, and that was it.
Wow, amazing. And what sort of challenges, either practical or from a mindset perspective, did you come across as you were sort of leading up to the departure date? And any sort of thoughts and advice on how you overcame those challenges?
Honestly, like coming up to it, I don't think I had too many challenges, right? Because like I was going on this like trip of a lifetime. I was like pretty excited about it. So, there wasn't a whole lot. I kind of needed to get like my life in order a little bit so that I could be away, from home for an extended period of time. So, like I subleased my apartment. So like that at least kind of covered off the rent side of things, but I knew I'd have somewhere to come back to rather than have to move all my stuff out. So that was fantastic, but there wasn't honestly like a whole lot else to figure out, which was great. And yeah, from a mindset perspective, not too many issues there. Like probably more once I was on the road, and I was actually a month or 2 months into this time off. Then it started to get a bit different. But leading up to it, I was just looking forward to it.
So talk us through, your time on the road. What did you do? How did you fill your days?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was talking to my brother about it recently because we were like, we're not actually sure. because there's not a whole lot to do, right? So we're just like living out of this four-wheel drive. You got a tent on the rooftop. My brother's in a swag on the floor. And we'd basically just get up in the morning, drive off somewhere, go for a surf, go for a swim on the beach, maybe lie around the beach for a little while, walk through the woods, and then, find the campsite that we were going to sit at like that night. And we get there, we'd make a fire, we'd cook some dinner, we'd have a beer, and we'd sit around and, chat, and then we go to bed. And then the next day you get up and
Rinse and repeat.
pretty much do the same thing. Do that for months. So, I mean, it's fantastic, right? Like Australia is such an amazing place to explore. And especially like I'd only ever been to the main parts, right? So, you go to Sydney, you go to Byron, you go to Melbourne, you go to Brisbane, you go to the cities, or you go to the places that are easily accessible, like from the cities, like within a few hours. Like if you go to like the south coast of New South Wales or, parts of South Australia, it's like they're 10, 12-hour drives from the nearest major airport, right? So
Mm.
you're not getting there unless you're kind of in between places. So I think it was really, really cool to explore all of those little spots. Which is so much fun. Honestly, yeah, I loved it. And all these little towns, like we kind of myself and my brother, like we grew up in a small town. And so we kind of associate way more with like small town people, small town, vibes, like the local pub and the banter at the pub and all that sort of stuff. Yet we'd been kind of living in Sydney or Dublin for like most of our adult lives. And so it was like really nice to get back and spend some time in that sort of a space, right? And it is, one of the goals I had for this sabbatical was that I wanted to actually figure out what it is that I wanted to do next with my career. And I know it's cliched, but having that opportunity to like slow down and to get away from the influences that surround you in your normal life, give you the chance to actually free up your headspace a little bit and have a bit more of an objective view on what you want to do. I think it's very tricky. Like if I'm sitting here in Bondi and I'm around the people I'm always around or I'm in the city, that influences what you desire, right? Like so even subconsciously if you're not aware of it. And so it's very helpful to have a change of environment if you're trying to figure out what it is that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much sacred time. And I think, I talk a lot about the where you spend it, who with. So as you mentioned, you and your brother, there's something beautiful within in that. What sort of things did you do whilst you were away to help you or support you try and figure out what it was
Mm.
you wanted to do?
Yeah, a few things were incredibly helpful. So I listened to a lot of audiobooks, right? So I was in the car driving all the time and I listened to some really, really fantastic books. One was it's not really anything to do with your career, but it just like put me in the mindset to be able to think about it, which was Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, like absolutely beautiful book. And also he has his amazing voice narrating it, which is fantastic. And then I listened to another one, which was much more on the other end of the spectrum, which is called Designing Your Life, which was recommended to me by a friend. That honestly completely changed how I thought about, creating or making decisions around how I wanted to spend my time and what I wanted to do with my career. So that has like a really structured process for going through how you want to figure out what you want to do. And I needed that. Like I like structure, I like process. I don't like too much hand wavy stuff. And so I basically just followed that process. And there's lots of different steps of it, but a lot of it is journaling and then like reflecting on it, doing the exercise, like actually do the exercises, right? A lot of the time you listen to these books, you don't actually do the stuff. I was like, no, I'm actually going to do the thing. So I do the exercises, you write them out in your journal in the morning over a cup of coffee, and then you're in the car for like 2 or 3 hours, right? And my brother was with me, but I also did a lot of the trip solo. And like that's good thinking time. So you write this stuff down, but then it's kind of marinating in your brain in these times where you're driving or you're cooking in the evening or you're surfing or whatever else it is, this time where it can kind of stuff can start to settle and find its place in your head. And then I think the third I probably did two other things as well. So I actually decided to start a podcast when I was on the road. About this topic. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and talk to all these people about their lives and their careers and what they found. Like, where did they get fulfillment from? Do they like it? Try and explore this. So I was like, I should record those conversations. So I did that and I started the podcast while I was driving, which was nuts. Like trying to record podcasts out of a car is very difficult in rural Australia. And then the fourth thing I did was I started to experiment. And so this is one of the big things I took away from that book and this whole process is they have this idea of like prototyping your life, right? So it's like you can't think your way into the job that you'd like to do. The only way is to actually test it out, right? Because you might think you want to do something, then when you go and do it, you realize, oh, I actually don't enjoy that at all, right? And I think we've probably all experienced that. And so there was a few things that I started to make like little micro experiments for. One of them was writing. I was like, okay, I'm going to write. So I started a blog, like just silly little blog post when I was on the road. But I was like, this is an opportunity for me to test out, do I like writing? You know? And I did. And I was like, oh, I actually find this really enjoyable. I find this really satisfying. So that's like a learning then that I was able to take into like my decision making around what I wanted to do next. So yeah, probably those four things. This is some good books. Follow that process in designing your life. And then I started a podcast and then kind of experimenting or prototyping.
You make a really good point around the execution and having the time to be able to execute. If we're in our normal BAU life and we're on the bus from Bondi into the city and you're listening to these audiobooks and then you go straight into work and you've got a mental, few hours of work, by the time you then leave work and go home and have your normal evening life, that sort of moment of inspiration from the book can be lost, right? Whereas actually that sacred time of being on sabbatical, away from, as you say, those sort of influences and whatnot, really can mean that you can execute what you're listening to and all the guiding sort of advice and things like that. I think it's a really, really valid point.
Yeah, 100%. The only thing I'd say in that though is you need to be careful because like it's also very easy to let the time slip by, right? Because you've no one telling you you have to do this or anything else. And
Mm.
so um you do still need to exert like some level of discipline or however it is that you build a habit for yourself, you do need to exert that.
How did you hold yourself accountable?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I'm trying to think about this. Like, I think I'm like relatively good at like self-discipline anyway, so it's something that's like not a massive challenge for me. I mean, I really like the atomic habits idea of like habit stacking. So it's like,
Mm.
you pair something else with something else. So I would always write in the morning. So I'd write in my journal in the morning. So I'd like every morning I knew I'm going to get up, I'm going to make a cup of coffee, I'm going to sit down and write. Right. That's easy. I know I'm going to be having my coffee, so I know I can sit down and write. And that's just like a practical way that it worked really well for me.
I've found on my sabbaticals that I've taken, it's routine as well. So I crave routine. So even though you're in this beautiful, you don't really have to do anything all day, and you're traveling and maybe moving from one place to another. Actually, for me, routine really helps my mental health. And so for me, it was that, as you say, yes, habit stacking, but also giving myself tasks throughout the day, which then held me accountable, but also gave me a bit of a routine. So whether it be, as you say, journaling in the morning or, then going for a dip and then doing something else that sort of is trying to get yourself to where you're sort of wanting to go or that sort of objective. How did you, I suppose, maintain a sense of routine or balance throughout your trip?
Look, I think I'm probably similar to yourself, right? Like I feel good when I have some sort of a routine, when I'm exercising, when I'm eating well. Um, it's obviously much harder to do that when you're not at home, like in your own, environment, in your own house, with your own gym. But I just realized that like I feel better when I do those stuff. So I kind of make the effort to do it. So I was traveling all the time, but every new town that we go into, if we found one, I'd like try and find a gym in there that I could go to. And I actually really enjoyed that.
When you talk about the sort of things that you were doing, these exercises and things like that, if you could think back to the beginning of the trip and the goal of really sort of finding out and having the space of exploring what you wanted to do when you came back, would you have done anything differently, or what would you have done differently?
Like like it worked pretty well for me, to be honest. Like by the time I got back and after a couple of months of like trying a few things out, I felt, even though I didn't have all the answers, I felt I had the tools to like find them. That was the major thing for me. I mean, the ideal scenario would be something that where I put a bit less pressure on myself to figure it out. I typically would have struggled like switching off on like holidays or anything like that because I crave being productive where I used to. Right, that was where I got my sense of value from. Was I would do work and somebody would say, Steve, that's a great job. You did good work, or I would know it's good work. And then I'd be like, thanks. I can now go and enjoy the rest of my day. And so being on holidays where you don't have that was like actually really difficult for me. And so I kind of found the same thing when I was on the road a bit. Like I'm not like I realize now I'm not the type of person. I actually couldn't. I don't know if I could do the trip again, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know if I could like live on the road. Right. I cut my trip short because of this. Right. I was supposed to do the whole lap. I didn't. I did 4 months. I got to Perth. I flew back to Sydney because my parents were coming to Sydney for a visit. I go back to Sydney and I was supposed to go back out and like continue the whole way around, but it would have been another 4 or 5 months. And I was like, I don't think I can do it. Like, I actually don't want to. This isn't like I'm not the type of person who's built to live out of a car. That was like the mental challenge for me was like, how do you, because you have two options, right? If you're not able to like chill out, if you need to be productive, one is either you like fix that, right? So you remove the need to feel productive, or the other one is like you deal with it. So you actually find ways to, have small tasks that you can work on that give you that feeling. I guess the ideal situation is option one, where you just like remove the need entirely. But like that probably takes, even more therapy than I've done on this. So, so the second solution like is also helps too, right? So that's why I had the podcast and I was writing like for my blog, and that was really nice. That gave me that, it wouldn't take that much time, but it gave me that feeling that I was doing something. And I needed that, right? Like just doing nothing every day kind of freaked me out, to be honest.
There's a couple of things I want to delve into there. So you talked about identity. How do you feel that your identity has changed then from pre
Mm.
time away and career break to where you are now?
Massively, massively, massively. But that's probably been a continuous process over the last few years. But so the super hard thing is, right, like if you the first time you meet somebody, one of the first questions they'll all ask you is, what do you do? Right? Now, if you don't have a job or if you're on sabbatical, like that can be a very difficult question to answer, right? And for me, like I always had jobs that I was very, very proud of and that people were impressed by. So, I liked being able to say, oh yeah, like I work at McKinsey. And people will straight away be like, oh, that's great, well done, you know? Um, whereas once you don't have that, you realize actually a lot of your identity is tied up, or for me, it was tied up in my work. So that's tricky, like, and getting past that is hard. I just tried to own it, So it's like, oh, if people are like, oh, what do you do? It's very easy. Oh, like, I'm looking for, I'm about to engage in a new job, or I just started something, or whatever. You're kind of almost like making excuses for yourself.
Mm.
But I kind of decided, I was like, I'm just going to own it. I'm just like, I actually don't do anything at the moment. I'm just taking some time off, you know? And people kind of almost feel bad for you at the start. And then I'm like, no, like it's okay. Like it's like,
I want
yeah, I
to.
want to. This is a
This is
decision.
my choice.
Exactly.
What is it, do you think, that makes that so hard for us to own that we're actually technically not
Mm.
employed or this is not what we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, nowadays, like like most people's identity is pretty much tied up in your job, right? It's a shortcut for your value, right? If I don't
Mm.
know if I don't know somebody and if they don't know me, I want them to think that I'm valuable or worthwhile to them or that I'm impressive in some way. And so if I can tell them a job that will get to all of that quickly, that's great, right? Whereas
Mm.
when you don't have that, you're kind of looking for other answers, right? So you're like, right, well, now I need to find some other way, right? And because right now they think I'm a waster, right? They think I'm just freeloading with no job. And so I need to prove to them that I'm not. So I think that's why it can be tricky.
It's societal stories, isn't it? It's all stories that we've grown up with and heard, and that there's a lot of undoing there.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And then especially if you're like, if you're the type of person who has been a high achiever, or if you've been quite ambitious in your career, that gets baked in even heavier, right? Because you put in all this effort to build this career and to get yourself into these impressive roles. So if that's not valuable, what the hell were you doing it for? Right?
Mm-mm-mm.
So it's kind of self-reinforcing. Like you actually you want to believe that it's valuable because then it justifies all of the work that you put into getting there.
Has it changed your way of interacting with people when you first see them or meet them? You know, you mentioned that normally it's hi, you know, what do you do? Has it changed that at all?
Yeah, definitely. I actually had somebody on my podcast call me out on this. So, I mean, my podcast was about career, so I don't think I was like that misplaced to ask them what they did. But she actually, in kind of the start of the conversation, I was like, "So, how do you explain what you do, like for your job?" And she was like, "You know, I think there's a lot better questions to like ask at the start of an interview, because she was like, I'm so much more than my job. Like I'm like a mother to my kids. I'm a wife to my husband. I'm a, all these other things as well. And I was like, Joe, it's actually a really fair point. It's kind of a boring question too, right? Because usually what happens is you ask people, what do you do? And then they tell you and you go, oh, cool. Like, because usually you don't know what it is. And they probably don't want to talk about it because they spend all their day doing it anyway. So yeah, I probably just try and, not ask that question or at least, suspend it until further down the track.
Yeah, yeah. Any questions that you now ask instead?
In general, I just like trying to find what the person's interested in
Mm.
because everybody has something, that they want to talk about with people, right? And they're like begging for somebody to talk about it with them. And so I don't have like a formula for finding that out, but if you can, or if you kind of tap on something and you're like, oh, this person's like really energized, all of a sudden you're like, tell me about that. Like, what's that about?
And you can tell, can't you? You can tell when somebody is, you know, excited or their eyes light up and they want to talk about something rather than, as you say, a boring, what do you do?
Exactly, yeah. And then going deep on that thing rather than, I mean, my friends slag me because siblings do too, because I hate the small talk. And there's something Irish people do in general that's actually particularly infuriates me. It's like, we get together, we just sit around and like tell stories, but not interesting stories. They'll be like, second or third degree removed stories. It's like, oh, when my cousin went to Vietnam, they went to this place and they said that it was like this. And I was like, I don't care at all about your cousin's trip to Vietnam. Like, I'm really sorry. Like, so I much prefer, maybe it makes me sound a bit psychopathic, but like, I much prefer like having a conversation about, well, what's actually going on with you? Like, what are you interested in? And then going a bit deep on it and saying, like, oh, tell me more about it. I actually want to hear
Mm.
about your weird, book that you're reading or whatever else it is.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I did some training in what we call circle, which is storytelling, and it's where a group come together and sit in circle
Hmm.
and do tell stories, right? But one of the four intentions is talk from the eye. Because actually, it's not your story to tell if it's somebody else's story. And actually, it totally loses impact. As you say, it's not as interesting. It's
Mm,
it's our own stories that are super interesting.
totally.
So yeah, it's a good point. And on that point, actually, what's the most memorable story of your trip?
The one that comes to mind was like, so we were down in Cape Otway, which is kind of like the southern tip of Victoria, just like kind of the Great Ocean Road comes down from Melbourne and then like back up. And so Cape Otway is just like that really southern point of it. And we were in this really remote, like kind of foresty area and we were camping there. And then I was just like sitting there, I was like making lunch or something, and there's like nobody around. Like, this place is absolutely deserted. It's beautiful, but it's deserted. And then I hear this like music. And I'm like, oh, I must have left my phone must be on, my speaker must be playing, whatever else. So I was like, what was that? So it was rumbling around. Wasn't my phone, wasn't the car. I was like, have I just gone crazy? I've been on the road too long. Like I've gone absolutely nuts. I'm now hearing like violin music like in my brain. And I was like, no, I don't think so. So I basically tried to follow it, and I followed it for about 100 meters. And then there's this like clearing in the woods. And I found this guy who's like sitting there playing the violin, right? And specifically, he was playing this Irish tune that's like one of my favorite tunes, right? I was like, what, what are you doing here? Like, what's going on? I thought I'd eaten some weird mushrooms or something. And this guy was basically there. I don't know what you'd call it. It was basically like a commune. So there's these like real hippie, like Aussie people who were just like full time living there, like eating out of their, like out of pots essentially. And they were just like living there and they were all mad into Irish music. And I was like, this is weird. I play Irish music. And so he was like, oh, like, do you have your instruments with you? And I was like, yeah, I do. So I got my instruments, and me, him, and his mates sat around in the forest in the middle of nowhere and played Irish music. And I was like, this is so weird. No one will believe me that this happened, but it did.
Legendary.
So yeah, that was my most memorable story for sure. I've got some more, but that one was just weird.
Oh, the beauty of travel that is as well, isn't it? And the unexpected. Like always expect the unexpected when you're traveling, I think. My goodness. So the other thing I wanted to delve into was you mentioned around cutting your trip short.
Mm,
And I think it's a really interesting point around when I'm coaching individuals, a lot of the time they have this preconceived idea of what they should be doing for their break. And actually, once we unpeel the layers, it's not what they need, what they really want to be doing. It's these sort of different pressures or ideas or guilt or all of
mm.
these emotions that create this. This is what I should be doing. So I'd love to just delve into, I suppose, when you first thought, hang on a minute, this isn't what I started to do isn't serving me, and the decision making process to then cut it short. It sounds like you left the Jeep in Perth. How did you get the Jeep back? I'm curious. And and then what the next part looked like.
Yeah, so that was a little bit tricky, right? Because I'm like, oh, I told people I was going to go all the way around Australia, and now I'm not, right? I'm kind of letting myself down here. But making decisions based on like some costs is like always a bad idea, right? So it's like you don't have to do this thing. I've gotten a lot better at just not really caring too much like what other people would think. Like first of all, no one's actually going to care. No one's going to come up to me and be like, "Oh, you lied to me. You said you were going to drive around Australia and you didn't." Like what an asshole. Like obviously, like they're not going to say that. Um, and so realizing that like people don't actually care, people don't think about you anywhere near as much as you think they might. And even if they did,
Mm.
it doesn't like what about it, right? Like even if you piss people off, like it doesn't actually matter. Like, um, it's your decision, it's your time, so just do with it whatever you want to do with it, and having a bit of like I've gotten a lot better at having the gumption to just be like, oh, like this might piss people off, and frankly, I don't care. Like I know that's the right decision for me, so I'm just gonna go and do it.
And so that's sort of where you sort of got to, was it, is actually this isn't serving me, I'm not enjoying this, I can't do another 5 6 months in the van. So
Mm.
yeah, how did you get the van back?
Yeah, good question. So I was, I kind of had like a bit of travel planned around that time anyway. So I was here with my parents like for like 3 weeks, and then a couple of weeks later I was going back to Europe for a few weeks. So it was kind of a bit of a like tumultuous time. What I did was I convinced a mate of mine to fly to Perth and drive from Perth to Adelaide for me.
No.
Yeah.
Oh right, I thought you were going to say Perth to Sydney.
Well, I mean, he honestly, like, he should have. Like, if you get to Adelaide, you're pretty much there. If he's listening to this, like, I still think you should have gone all the way, but I understand why he didn't, so that's fine. Um, so he drove to Adelaide, and then I was flying back from Dublin. So I flew Dublin to Perth, and then I just got a flight from Perth to Adelaide, and then drove from Adelaide back to Sydney in like a few days. So, yeah, it was a bit of a bit of a trip, but I got it back eventually. I looked at like all the other options, like ship it back or put it on a train or whatever else. It's like ridiculously expensive
Yeah.
because I had surfboards and everything else on the roof of it, and so it was going to be just like an absolute pain in the ass. Um, so yeah, it just wasn't a runner. So yeah, got it back eventually.
Well done. And so what was the next part of the story?
Yeah, so I think the next couple of months are probably actually the trickiest for me, right? So it's kind of like you're now back at home.
Mm,
I'd gotten closer to what I wanted to do, but I wasn't coming back with like a solid answer. And I knew that what I wanted to do next wasn't going to be going back into like a full-time role. And that made it extra hard. Because if you, at least if you're going into a full-time role, okay, you got to go through the recruitment process. But once you have it, that gives you the security, it gives you the routine back, it gives you the co-workers. So you can kind of plop back into that life or whatever version of that life that you want. I didn't have that.
mm.
And so that was probably like the trickiest months for me, right? You're not on holidays anymore, like you're home, but you got to try and, make something happen for yourself now.
You know what you don't want,
Yeah.
but it's then navigating what is it that I do want and I do.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So I wanted to kind of continue on this road of like experimentation, right? So there's a few different things where I was just like, I think I would, I kind of narrowed it down to like a couple of different areas that I thought I might enjoy working in. So I was like, let me go and find opportunities to do this, and to test it out and to see if I enjoy it. And then, yourself, like these things, sometimes you're just lucky, stuff comes out of the woodwork. There's one or two kind of like opportunities came out. Like made the decision that I was pretty sure I wanted to work in the mental health space. I just wasn't sure exactly what form of it. And what happened was so fortuitous. So somebody had actually listened to my podcast, heard about my background, and he was starting a VC fund here in Australia, and he was looking to hire people. So he reached out to me for a chat. I had a conversation with him because I thought he was a cool guy. I was like, okay, it's an interesting opportunity, if nothing else. And I had this like dilemma, which was like, okay, do I take this really cool role at this VC fund, which wasn't really in my plan, right? This wasn't what came out from all the work on my sabbatical, but it's an awesome job and I can take the job. Like, yeah, like it'd be cool. And I was like, no, no, no. I took this time off because I wanted to be very conscious about what I wanted to do next. I was like, I'd done the work to figure it out. So I had the confidence to know
Mm.
that I didn't want that role. And so I went back to him and I said, thank you so much. Like, this is amazing. But honestly, I don't want to take it. And the reason is because I want to focus purely on mental health now. And I know that if I take this role, like I can't do that, right? You don't have enough work to be fully focused on mental health. And he got back to me, he was like, completely understand that. Why don't you just like consult for us like 1 or 2 days a week and to just do mental health work? And I was like, sounds like a great idea. Yeah, 100%. So I basically took that. That was kind of one of the first like consulting jobs that I took, and then kind of stuff led on from there. But I think the lesson I took away from that was like, one, if you've done the work to figure out what it is that you want to do, like stick to your guns like as much as you can. Like it's really hard. I know it's tough if you are like under pressure to get a job and all that sort of stuff. But if you can stick to your like really do try and stick to your guns. Don't just cave when you get back. Like you figured it out for a reason.
Such a good point.
Yeah,
Taking the easy route would have been
100%.
saying yes to the job, right? Rather than actually no, but then explaining why, which led to actually an even better option.
Well, I think that's it as well, right? It's like you got to, I mean, not that I asked for, I didn't even think about this as an opportunity, but like I nearly didn't put that in the email to him. I nearly was like, oh, what does he care why
Mm,
I didn't take it? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, he just cares whether I'm interested in the role or not. So I think there's definitely a lesson there about kind of saying why, or even like asking for what you actually want, right? And yeah, they can be like, hey, look, that just doesn't work for us, right? But it's like, hey, well,
mm.
look, I put my cards on the table for what would have worked for me. If that doesn't happen, that's fine. But if you don't tell them, they can never give you the opportunity. Like they won't know. Like they're not psychics.
No, absolutely. And it's also maybe that it's not an opportunity that they can offer, but actually, if they know, they might be at a dinner party the next week or whatever, and they're talking, they're like, oh well actually, but as you say, if you don't put it out there, nobody's going to know, and nobody can then have the information to be able to lead to a different opportunity. So talk to us about, I suppose, where you are now,
Mm,
in comparison to when you first went off on your sabbatical, both from a mindset perspective and
mm.
also the sort of practicalities, what life looks like now in comparison to before.
It's funny, right? It's night and day, but not because before was bad. Before was actually pretty great. It's just now, even better, right? So if you look at the different categories of it, so from a job perspective, before I was working something that some elements of it I enjoyed, but a lot of the elements of it I realized I didn't enjoy, right? So managing large teams, right? Turns out I don't enjoy that. Just don't like having like 8 or 9 direct reports. Not that, I like them all individually. Like having to have 8 or 9 one-to-ones like every week drives me crazy. Just really drains energy from me. I don't do that anymore. Um, having to deal with like kind of the politics of like a company really, really drains me. I don't do that anymore. Practically, I used to work that the company was based in Ireland and we had offices in the US. So I'd spend like a lot of my evenings on calls. So between kind of like 6 and 10 p.m. or 6 and 11 p.m. every evening, I'd be sat here in this seat on calls. Don't do that anymore. Right. So there's a lot of like practical things that have changed. I used to work in fintech, an industry I frankly just wasn't super passionate about. That's very different to me now. I work in an industry that I really care about. So there's like a lot of different, like very, very practical differences from a job side of things. Um, I'm able to, you know, do the work that I like follow my own curiosity, build the type of company that I want to build, work with the type of people that I want to work with, like just on a very practical level. Like my days look really great. Like I really like how like my average it's Tuesday today, right? I had a great Tuesday. I just really liked how I spent my day today. So that's fantastic. And then like outside of the actual work, I've kind of got like more freedom over like my schedule and like how I spend my time, like it was pretty good at Wayflower. I could that was my last company. I could travel, quite a bit, but now I can travel even more, right? Like I'm an Irish guy living in Sydney. It's important that I'm able to go back and see my family and my parents whenever I want to, and I can do that. Like I don't have to. But the I guess the point of this is not all. It's not that these are the great things for everybody. They won't matter to other people, but it's the point. Like the process that I went through. I'd love to go back and write it, see it. I wrote down these things. I was like, I don't want to work more than X hours per week, right? I don't want to work after this time. I don't want to manage, more than 3 people. I don't, and I was like really specific on the exact things that I wanted. And in terms of how much money I want to make, really specific around that, how much time, freedom to travel, whatever those things are, being like really specific around them. And then once you know them, you're able to craft your life around them. But if you haven't articulated them, you can't do them, right? But then again, once you have them, you have to be strict with yourself because there's even issues on like the upside where like I know there's more work that I could take on.
Mm,
That'd be great, right? I'd make more money, but it would mean that I would start working hours that I wouldn't like don't want to work anymore. I'd have to travel more than I would want to, right? So you kind of also need once you know the stuff, it kind of needs to become like gospel for you because you're always going to be tempted to go against it. But it's like, no, no. When you were objective and rational and writing these down, you knew that they were the right things to write down. So
mm.
try and stick to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my husband and I talk about non-negotiables all the time, and we have our inner circle, which is our non-negotiables, and then we have an outer circle of maybe you'd call it a wish list. I don't know, but those
Hmm.
things you can flex on, but not if they compromise the non-negotiables in the
Yes.
middle circle. And I think, as you say, there's always going to be those temptations and the carrot dangled of more money or something that looks too good to be true, or something like that. But actually, it's sticking to, as you say, when you were rational and when you had that space and time and sacred place to actually think about what it was that you wanted life to look like, just use that as your anchor. But
Hmm.
it's hard. It's hard.
It is. Yeah.
Or what have you done to ensure that that is your anchor? And any, I don't know, tips or tricks that you would sort of share with our listeners around getting back into work but not losing all of
Mm.
that sort of self work that you did on your sabbatical.
I do a couple of things. So one I actually took from that book, Green Lights. So he was a big journaler, and so he was like, a lot of people just journal like during the bad times, right? So it's like when things aren't going well, they'll be like, oh, like this is going to go well, or I can't figure this out, or whatever else. He was like, you really need to journal during the good times too, because that becomes like the breadcrumbs for finding your way back there if you get a bit lost. And so I've always been very, I mean, I kind of always journal all the time, but especially when things are good, right? You have a good day, you have a good week, write down exactly what you did, right? Because you'd be surprised, you'll forget about it. And then you'll be having a bad day or a bad week like a few months later, and you'll be like, why was today bad, but a couple of months ago I had a great day? And you mightn't actually be able to figure out what the difference was. And so I really like having that track record of this is what a great day looks like, this is what a great week looks like. And then if you ever get lost, you can follow the breadcrumbs back to that day and say, what was I doing? Who was I hanging out with? Right? Like how much was I exercising? What was I eating? How much was I drinking? Right? And you can then use that to get back to the good place.
Mm.
In terms of not losing the self work that you've done, I think what's been helpful for me is like having, I wouldn't call them mini sabbaticals, but holidays or times where you can get back to that I guess you call the sacred space, right? So for me, it's camping, right? Like I'll take my Jeep out. Like over New Year's, I did it. I just went off for 4 days into the middle of nowhere on
Mm.
my own, right? And you kind of get back into that space, and you're like, oh, this, I remember this space, and all the stuff keeps sort of like comes back to you pretty quickly. So I think that's one good little tip, but I think the rest of it is, it's tricky. Maybe the only other thing is it's so easy to fall back into like your routines and habits. So that's the great thing about the sabbaticals. You change all that, you change in the environment. Now, when you come back into the home, that's your chance to change the habits, right? And to change them the second you get back, rather than not changing them, because the old ones will, if you don't consciously change them, the old ones will just fill the space. Like with your best intentions, they just will.
Absolutely. And I think that is where the magic happens, is where you actually take everything that you've learnt, all of the behaviors, the changes, the transformation, and actually implement it back into BAU as such. It's where the magic happens for sure.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I would say like it's really hard. Like it's actually really hard.
Mm?
It's not like you go away and you figure stuff out and you come back and you go, "Oh, great, I'm just like gonna, change everything now or start this new career path, whatever else." It's bloody hard stuff to do. So yeah, I don't know what to say to people except for the fact that it's worth it, right? Like from my perspective, it's like it's really worth it. So if that's anything to kind of keep you going, maybe cling on to that. But it's really tough. And if it feels tough, that's okay. It's not a sign that you weren't supposed to do it or something's going wrong. It's just like making any big change is always going to be hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a way to finish our conversation. And Steve, thank you so much for your time. What I like to do is end with asking you, for our audience and our listeners, what would be your top three tips to anybody thinking about taking a sabbatical or about to embark on a career break?
My number one tip would be do it. I know a lot of people think about it.
It's worth it.
Do it, right? I think it's a fantastic thing to do. The second one, just make sure that like practically you're set up right to do it. Like even like financially, you've kind of planned it. You're not because what you don't want is any of those practical stressors like on you, right?
Mm,
So you need to financially make sure that you can do it and that you've got a decent buffer as well, right? Because it always takes longer to get back into a job and back making money than you think it will. And so like make sure that you avoid those stresses. Um, and then I think the third one is like it's a really great opportunity to just like say yes to stuff that you never would have said yes to before. Um, like read books you wouldn't usually read, like listen to podcasts you wouldn't usually listen to, you know, have a yarn in a pub with somebody you usually wouldn't talk to. Um, like you never know like where that can lead you. And I think a sabbatical can be like a really safe space for you to do those things and kind of explore those kinds of stuff. Don't think too much. Like, don't think too much about it. Just kind of follow what you're interested in.
Follow the violin music.
Follow the violin music. Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
To clearing in a wood with some hippies playing some Irish jigs.
Exactly.
Love
Yeah,
it.
that's the metaphor for my whole trip.
Yeah, I love it. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Steve.
Oh, thank you. This is
And
great.
are you still doing your podcast and blog? Where can people find you and follow you?
Yes. So the blog's under a pseudonym, so you'll never find that one. But you can find the podcast, which is the Two Roads podcast. So we did like 50. I did an episode basically every week last year, so I think it's like 52 episodes. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn as well. It's probably the best place if you want to follow me or reach out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate your situation. Let's try to keep this real.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Sabbatical Stories. I really do appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to join us. Thanks to Steve for sharing his incredibly insightful and inspiring story, and a reminder to all of us that if we hear the music in the forest, to follow it. Steve's book recommendations, podcast and LinkedIn profile will be in the show notes. Thank you to Auntie B at the Flaxen, my incredible, patient and talented producer. I also want to give a special shout out to the incredibly talented Joanna Cook, whose soulful blend of smooth vocals we're lucky enough to use throughout the show. And if you're interested in sharing your story on Sabbatical Stories, please do get in touch. DM me on my Instagram account, which is sabbatical_stories, or Rebecca Thomas on LinkedIn, both of which links will be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you could subscribe, like and rate the show. It would mean a lot to me. And also, if you think a friend would like this episode, please do buzz it over to them. After all, sharing is caring. Until the next time, take care and dream big.
Tendencies and determination may well bring countless words of the bandits feel that bow with strings and a heart full of soul that's connected. And I'm moving along, I won't let it all. Turn the other cheek, show them your smile. You won't believe things for a while. Taking matters into your own hands, you won't believe that you're making headway, and plans. And deep down, you try, dig deep, search wide, enjoy your climb, and it's all for you. Deep down, you try, dig deep, search wide, enjoy your climb, and it's all for you. Deep down, you try, dig deeper, search wide.